Okay.
See how it goes.
I can meander with the best of them.
Yeah, oop, I just hit your camera, Dave, so fix it before we get.
All right. Jim, you'll be looking at Todd through all this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And go ahead and take it when you're ready.
Tell me about your career in media.
Okay. I started to work at the Roanoke Times 2 days after I graduated from the University of Tennessee. I was a reporter, the typical cub reporter, covered the cops, covered the police, covered a little government, and actually ran their bureau in Salem when they had a bureau in Salem for 5 years. That was from 1970 until 1975. 1975, I went to work for WDBJ Television as assignment editor. I actually replaced John Lambert, not as an anchor. John was anchoring the 11 o'clock news, but I did the assignment editing part of it. And about a year and a half later, I became news director with the tender number of 18 months experience to be able to do that. And was there until DBJ let me go in August of 2002, about 27 years. And so I had the wonderful opportunity of working with guys like Irv Sharp, worked with people like Hal Grant, Dudley Townsend, a whole bunch of those guys that really formed communications, television communications, early in the business in Roanoke. Irv, of course, came through radio and gained a real reputation in radio. But I was fortunate that when I started, we were shooting 16 millimeter film, and when I left, we were using satellites. So I had an opportunity to see a broad range of things that we could do.
You guys in the 70s to the 80s had one of the most talented production staffs in the house that would rival a lot of film studios. You had who was it? Ben
Javad,
the guy he lives in Curtis Story.
Curtis Downing, Jerry Sheeler worked there some off and on. Then you had guys like Ken Ferguson was there during that period of time, Ed Cabness. And the thing about that was, during the period that you referenced, Todd, they had the best equipment. They did almost all the commercial production for television in this part of the country. And they had the tools that they needed. They had the creative ideas. And advertisers then were much, much closer to the television stations as a production company than they would be today. They were our buddies.
That's a great answer. Can I get you to rephrase that, because my voice isn't going to be on here?
Okay.
It's sort of as a something like, if people don't know that in Roanoke in the 70s we were doing production all over
Sure.
the country because we had good relationships. My voice won't be on there, and you said where you referenced next, and I won't reference back.
Okay.
So let's try that again.
Okay, sure. What many people perhaps will not know is the talent and the support that local production got at WDBJ during a period of the late 60s through the 70s on into the 80s, maybe even as early as the early 60s. We were the place you came to get commercial television production done. The equipment was good, the talent was very creative, and we would go wherever we needed to go to do the work. We worked, had jobs for organizations like Kroger, and did a lot of Kroger's work throughout the Mid-Atlantic region. So there was just a talented group of people there with the kind of equipment, and really no one else was doing commercial production at the level that television station was doing it in those days.
Why do you think a community how do you think a community benefits from having a strong advertising, group of people who do advertising and marketing?
I had the opportunity when I was at WDBJ to teach some classes out of Virginia Western Community College. One of the things I told those students, and many of them went on to work at DBJ in production and in news, what I told them was advertising is another form of communications. It's a very important informational form. It's as important informationally to a community as news is, because you're particularly local commercials, because you are telling people what's out there, what's available to them. It's a lot of times a reflection on the personality of the community. Advertising is one of the things that keeps the economy moving. Some people accuse us of selling things that don't need to be sold, but the simple fact of the matter is they're telling people, giving people, imparting information that people need.
Great answer. That's terrific. You met a lot of people who are in the advertising industry. Tell me one that stands out as an admirable person to you, that maybe you met in the 60s, 70s, 80s when you were young in your career, and why you felt they were admirable.
The person that I probably respect most as a broadcaster, he was a broadcaster, but most of it was in advertising, is Irv Sharp, without a doubt, because of his history. He had a national presence at one time, deeply committed to this community. And when Irv died 20 years ago, he was still an employee at WDBJ Television. He was one of those people who was funny, he was lighthearted, but he took broadcasting very, very seriously. He was the old Dr. Pepper man back years and years ago on radio. He carried that into television. And he was always ready, always on the air, always ready to do whatever he needed to do. And he was doing the morning show on DBJ for many years after I got there.
Tell me about the Dr. Pepper connection, because I don't think a lot of people know about that.
My background in it is not as good as some of the other folks you'll probably talk to, but it's my understanding that we actually were a national test market for Dr. Pepper back in the 50s and 60s. I know that Irv had, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. They had a campaign where you would get a silver dollar for every Dr. Pepper you had in your refrigerator if Irv called you and you happened to be the one they called. This was at WDBJ Radio. And so he could call, and if you had a six-pack of Dr. Pepper in your refrigerator, then you got 6 silver dollars from Irv Sharp. And because he was working then some on a national level, he also managed to use that across the country. And I think Dr. Pepper at the time, I'm not really sure where they were. It may have been Texas. You'll have to check that, but I'm not really sure. And then what happened with Dr. Pepper, as far as WDBJ is concerned, on the TV side with Dudley Townsend, they did the old Saturday session dance contest, program on Saturday afternoons, and Dr. Pepper was the sponsor of that. And that's one of the very earliest sponsorships I can remember growing up in this market and seeing them do it.
Very cool. People talk about, a lot of times people will talk about the really talented people go to the major markets, da-da-da-da-da-da. But, I've always felt like I've had the privilege to work with a lot of really talented people who chose not to. Why do you think this market retains people who could work anywhere, or do you think the people that here are talented enough to work anywhere?
The people that I've been associated with in advertising and in news and broadcasting generally, many of them are extremely capable and could work at just about any kind of television market in the country. I've never, ever questioned that. I think this market is fortunate that they stay here, and it's for a couple of reasons. One is it's a great place to live. The other reason, particularly during the period of time when we're discussing, that period in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, there was a tremendous amount of support by the local broadcast operations. They were all local. John Harkrader, who ran WDBJ television in its infancy, was a Wytheville native. This was home. What he did and what he said and how he led that television station was for his neighbors. Chuck McKeever, who followed him, was the same way, graduated from over at Jefferson High School. And so they had a direct tie and a connection that made you feel proud yourself that you were involved with something like that. Beyond that, people here in the community respected them, and they showed that. In a community like Roanoke, it's a large enough market where you can do some really positive, good things, but small enough to where that audience can touch you, that can interact with you, that can show its appreciation on a regular basis. So I think there are a lot of factors there, but this thing of being local, as long as an organization like WDBJ7 had people leading it that were from this market and of this market, you really, really found people who worked for it invested in them. We sometimes talk about there was a period in time we'd have probably paid WDBJ to work for them.
That's a great answer. Great answer. What things can you think of that have happened in our community that wouldn't have happened without the support of the advertising community and the support of the media community?
Roanoke Design 79. it probably was the first interactive television in this part of the country. And that's what got Center in the Square going, what got so much of the downtown Roanoke development started. It happened in 1979. We had a lot of the local advertisers were behind us. We did live programs in the studios at WDBJ. Ted Powers, their public affairs director, and Bern Ewart, who was the city manager at the time, worked with a couple of architects who actually drew people's thoughts as they called in. Like I say, it's interactive. And I can't remember who the specific sponsors of it were, but the advertising community embraced that because the advertising community, which represents the business community, saw what that was going to do for the growth and development, economic development of the Roanoke City market area and downtown Roanoke in general. So that's the first thing that always comes to mind to me. That was 1979. That's 33, 34 years ago. And that we do interactive communications all the time now, but that was done with a paper and a pencil and a guy drawing on a flip chart.
What about the advertising community and media support to say the Hotel Roanoke? You were kind of involved in the news at the time, and
Right.
the station at the time, and
Right. But that's a good example, Todd, because John Lambert was very much involved from an advertising agency standpoint in moving that project forward. And the business community was very much behind it. I think the advertisers, or a lot of things done where the advertisers provided monetary support to be able to get some of the exposure that it needed. So what you're talking about there is, where does advertising fit in as far as community service and public service is concerned? And I think that's always been something, once again, you come back to a market like Roanoke, where they've had a role. They felt like that they are invested in this community as well. It's by being in the news side of it and in the public service side of it, I don't think I appreciated it as much then as I do now, looking back on some of the things that those folks did. I think it's remarkable, some of the things that happened during a period of time when actually broadcast television itself was only growing. It was still a fairly new communications process.
what was good? What was the best thing about the way business was done in the '60s and '70s or the '70s and '80s in Roanoke? What was the best thing about it? What was the noble thing about it?
One-on-one communications. You could sit down, you go down the street and have lunch with somebody, you could talk to them, and who you were talking to was somebody who could make a decision. Who you were talking to was somebody that was invested in a community. As I say, they could be raised here, their kids were being raised here. There was not nearly the corporate structure and corporate feel that we have now. And these guys, if you had a project going, they could make it happen. You did not have to go to the next level. The governments worked with the businesses. The Roanoke Forward ticket in 1976, all of that helped build this valley. So I think the main thing was it was just a good, honest dialogue. You could talk to these guys, and you could follow up. You could pick up the phone and call somebody and say, "Hey, can we get together tomorrow for lunch?" And it's, no emails and no cell phones. And you just sat down and you worked it out.
Tell me about Roanoke Forward. I heard about that. That was predated me being
Right,
here. But
right.
I don't know much about it.
Well, it's I've got to be careful what to say because it's kind of spotty in my memory too. But I covered it. It was my early days at Channel 7. But that was a ticket that got Mayor Noel Taylor started, and then guys like Nick Todman were on it, Hamp Thomas, and a couple of others. And what it was a business-oriented ticket. That they ran that way. That was the idea was that they were going to develop Roanoke economically. And of course, in 1976 and 1979, you had all of the downtown development projects beginning, and so their whole focus was on how can we strengthen economic development and business development in this community. And it was unusual only because they ran as a ticket that way. That was one of the things where all of them were going for the same outcome.